Hey guys, Gassy TV here with another Path of Exile build guide video. In this one, we're going to be covering the elemental hit Ballista Totem Hierophant build guide. It has the possibility to reach about 15 to 20 million Shaper DPS. However, that comes with the requirement of a lot of currency. Instead, we're going to be focusing this build guide on the lower budget version that reaches about 5 to 7 million Shaper DPS, and it's not that very hard. It is stacking quite a lot of unique items, such as a Quill Rain, Frostfurno, Calm's Heart, and a couple of other unique items, and all of these are very cheap, which I'll be covering in the build guide itself. However, before we do jump into this build guide, I do want to talk about a few things that I think is rather important. First one, if you're watching this video months after it was posted, there's always the risk of this video being outdated. Do check the written version guide linked in the descriptions below to make sure that you're looking at the updated version for this build. The other thing is that Ballista Totems works a little bit different than most other totem builds. It's not all just glory. Here, let me show you. My biggest problem with the approach of this build is actually the fact that it is Ballista Totems, and there was a problem with those that I didn't know about till I actually tried out this build. So, when it comes to this build and I go to check my tree, we are using Point Blank. Now this makes our projectile attacks hits deal up to 30% more damage to targets at the start of their movement, but deals less damage to targets as the projectile travels further. Now we're going to put up an idea where this crafting bench over here is actually the enemy boss that I would like to damage and kill. The way you have to play is to stand close to the boss, and then you have to summon your Ballista Totems, which in this build is 7. So then I will spam up my totems, and the more totems you have, the better the region is, because as you can see, it's a little bit slow at the first couple, but the more totems you have, the better region you have, which eases up on the mana, so you don't really need to use a mana potion. So as you can see, they're all landing where they should be, around the target, and then these will be perfectly fine with the Point Blank. Now, if the boss is the crafting bench and I am standing here a little further away from the enemy and I would like to place them over there, I will right click. Here's the biggest problem. They don't reach further than how big my radius on the actual sandstands is actually. So the problem is I can't get them further than this. Now this is a problem because the build is not a very tanky build. It's thriving its defensive stats from the face acro and acrobatics and keystones, which means that we don't want to tank things. We want to stay away from things. But this playstyle forces you to move up, place your totems, and then move away so you can get your frenzy charges up from the actual frenzy charges approach. However, outside of that, the build is pretty straightforward with the skills. We're using Infernal Cry, which is not really there for clearing. It is there to increase damage taken from bosses. We have a blink arrow for mobility and a dash for mobility. We have a Vol Haste. Do note we don't use the normal haste, it's only a Vol Haste for the extra burst. We have an Assassin's Mark to scale that crit, which we'll use on bosses. And we use Frenzy every now and then as we're placing our totems. And this is a stupid amount of attack speed. So when we're playing versus clearing, for example, you just glance up here and then you shoot a little bit and you'll notice you have 4 stacks of Frenzy charges. Versus bosses, it's the same thing. Just place your totems and then hit it a couple times with the frenzy and you'll have 4 charges. So it's only there to use a couple times to get that extra charge to make sure that you're doing the most damage you can with the abilities. And that kind of covers the active skill jumps and the problem I have with the playstyle. But in general, it's only this being the biggest problem where I can't place the totems close enough if I don't move up there. Normally, it's not a big problem versus endgame bosses, but I think that it should be mentioned in a guide like this. Let's just jump into the actual items. The build focuses on a couple of key unique items such as Quill Rain, which will provide a massive amount of attack speed as well as projectile speed increase that helps clearing significantly. This item don't even need to be 6-linked and it's extremely cheap on the market of any league that we've ever seen. We're also going to be using the classical Calm's Heart. Now this chest piece is here strictly to scale HP on a very cheap way, as we are not in need of any 6-link neither from the Quill Rain or the Calm's Heart itself, which doesn't come with any sockets. This is because we are going to be using the Prophecy unique item Frostfurno. In this helmet is where our elemental hit goes, as it will get 4+ extra levels and be supported by a level 30 Call to Fire, which will significantly increase the damage that we'll be doing. The most important unique would be the 2 versions of the 3 combat focus threshold jewels. In this guide, we will be using the Viridian and Crimson versions. This will force the elemental hit to always hit with fire damage. And by using the Avatar Fire Keystone, we will then convert 50% of whatever is left of the cold and lightning approaches to give ourselves even more fire damage. Seeing as we are shooting projectiles and using totems, we also want to use the Rain of Splinters for more projectiles across the board. This helps clearing significantly. And last but not least, the unique item would be a Cinder Swallow, which is also very attractive, but far from mandatory. It's a nice addition to have, in my opinion. The rare items of this build is very straightforward, like anything that scales critical strike multiplier, elemental damage with attacks, and or attack speed are the most pressing offensive stats besides the generic fire damage scaling. Do note that the accuracy is very important in this build as well, so that you have a 100% chance to hit. And obviously capping your elemental resistances as well as having enough attributes to use your gems and gear. A plus level of skills on the amulet would be a very attractive item, such as plus level of dexterity skills or plus level of fire skills, or both if you can afford the woke orb. However, if you want to go for the super cheap version of this, we can always use the unique item Marlene's Fallacy. Seeing as the unique items for this build is extremely cheap and the way it performs in the start of the all endgame, I believe this build is among the most solid League starter builds you could ever play. No 6 linking required. The leveling of this build can be done in numerous different ways, ranging from totems to actual spellcasting, but do check out the written guide linked in the descriptions for a more detailed description of that end. It does come with a rather unique playstyle, using Ballista Totems, which I felt was a nice breath of fresh air. Speaking of having a nice breath of fresh air, I've kind of coined this build skill tree the Lord of the Rings Frodo Baggins travel. So a breath of fresh air is exactly what Frodo's gonna get with this tree, because we're starting as a Hierophant Templar. We will be taking out the damage and mana on a date as we move in to get to the Retribution, which will be the end of that night. Suddenly, we are going over to the Holy Dominion, Divine Fervor, and going to Devotion as we travel upwards to the Ancestral Bond. Now, this is something I would do for leveling this build and actually level with totems myself. However, might not use the Ballista Totems. The detailed leveling descriptions will be in the written version linked in the descriptions below. So this could basically be the approach of us going to Rivendell, because the Avatar Fires will be needed once you spec and start using Elemental Hit. And then it turns out that you are actually going on a very long journey. This journey will take you on the outside of the world, all the way down to Barbarism, picking up some jewel slots for the combat focus once you go Elemental Hit. We're going to continue walking this road over to Lava Lash and take a small little detour down in the Caves of Moria, where we get a bit of surveillance as well as Panopticon. And then we're moving through the Golden's Blood, as well as picking up Point Blank, the extra HP from Thick Skin, and Far Sight for damage with bows if you're already using Elemental Hit at this point, and then going Wind Dancer. And we have a triple cluster setup here with a Lethality, as well as Primeval Force and Watchtowers, which will scale your damage significantly for this type of build, as well as the option of using Master Fletcher and King of the Hill. Now, these nodes here are so strong that I've tried to make a cluster jewel setup work in this build, and honestly, these nodes are so ridiculously strong, I couldn't really make a cluster jewel version of this feel good enough. But we're also picking up the Acuity for the increased accuracy, attack speed, the extra critical strike multiplier, another jewel socket for Rain of Splinters, and as we finally end at the in the volcano, we're going to get our fingers bit off by Golem here in acrobatics. Samwise going to carry your ass up there, and we have the entire approach here of the entire endeavor happening, and Golem finally dies and the world is safe with face acrobatics. So that basically covers the entirety of this skill tree. It's very straightforward. I would say that if you do level with this build, the generic approach would be to rush through the elemental nodes, actually pick up the Holy Dominion, but instead of Divine Fervor, you'd pick up like the Divinity and go through Devotion into Ancestral Bond, use Holy Flame Totem, and then during Act 5, switch to Frost Pulse, Freezing Pulse totems with the Threshold Jewel that you get from one of the quests there. you could potentially look into playing or something around with Forbidden Rite totems if you want to as well. A big note on the oiling of this though is that we do want to use Shaman's Dominion for the increased critical strike chance if you've summoned a totem recently. It also gives you increased critical strike multiplier with totem skills and increased crit with brands, which we don't really care about. So that is the node that I would recommend oiling, and that's about it. Very straightforward, very generic, long hike kind of tree, but it does work out very, very well. I'm going to talk about the skills a little bit. First, we have Elemental Hit. This is going into the Frostferno helmet. And then we have Elemental Damage with attacks. Then we have the actual Awakened Fire Penetration. The reason we have Awakened Fire Penetration, even though this is a low-budget build, is because the Awakened Fire Penetration is extremely cheap. Obviously, use the normal one before you have access to a cheap Awakened Fire Penetration. Next up is the Ballista Totem support. This is so that we actually do have totems. So these are the 4 links that we will put in our helmet that gets +2 to fire, +2 to cold, as well as the support of the level 30 cold to fire support gem, essentially making us a 5-link for a 4-link setup. The other setups is using Flesh and Stone, Infernal Cry with Skitterbots and Precision. Keep in mind that you might want to use a lower level precision as you're leveling and as you're playing the game. It all depends on how much mana you feel comfortable to be using as you're progressing through the game. At a lower levels, having a lower level precision will allow you to have maybe a cast extra, maybe 2 on the totals before you need to wait for the mana regen to kick up, which can be a bit smoother to play. Just keep in mind to check your accuracy as you're going about the world. The mobility setup is what I would prefer, a dash blink arrow with faster attacks for the blink arrow. You can actually use both dash and blink arrow in connection to one another, which is really, really, really nice. Obviously, I'm using a lightning golem here. The golem choice can be whatever. If you want to be more tanky versus damage over time effect, you can use a stone golem, for example. You can use a chaos stone for more physical damage mitigation. The choice is yours. The curse setup is where I actually put in the bow. I'm using a 6-socket bow, but in this case I had a 3-link setup, which was mainly for the frenzy, but it really doesn't matter how you link this. So the ones I put in this guide was to have a assassin mark. The assassin mark don't need to be linked with anything. The Vol haste don't need to be linked with anything. Keep in mind that we do not use the actual haste aura. We are using Frenzy for the Frenzy charge with GMP to make sure we hit as many targets as possible. We're also using a Blood Rage. This is to get extra attack speed, but also give us Frenzy charges on kill, which does not work on the totems. But it gives us extra attack speed for free, essentially. Other than that, you don't really have to do anything else if you want to add or mix or match any of these gems, support gems, or links that I've been sorting out for this build. Feel free to do so. There are no limitations on anything outside of the setup for the Elemental Hit version. I would strongly recommend keeping Flesh and Stone. I like the Infernal Cry because it's a free way to get extra damage versus single target because of the modifier that makes it so that the explosion deals fire damage to 8% of monsters' max HP, but it covers enemies in ash, causing them to take 3% increased fire damage taken per 5 power up to 20%. Increased damage taken modifiers on enemies is among the best way to scale damage in this game. That kind of covers everything for this guide. Pantheons is a matter of personal preference. Bandits, I killed them all because we're taking a very long hike here. I need every skill point I can get my hands on. I hope you guys had fun with this, so let's just wrap this up, shall we? I hope you enjoyed this video, and I hope you hit that like button and subscribe for more content, because apparently, if I don't ask you guys, no one ever does. So yeah, just hit the like button, subscribe for more content. It actually really helps out the channel, so I very much appreciate that. Thank you. Another reminder is that if you're watching this video months after it was posted, do check out the written version of this guide linked in the descriptions below to make sure that you're looking at the updated version and only treat this video as a way of showing you the gameplay of the actual ability. Let me know in the comments below what you guys think of this build. Until next time, stay safe and keep rocking.